Hey guys, so I've been watching a lot of videos lately about healing chronic symptoms, people's journeys through other chronic conditions that closely mimic withdrawal, and what is bringing people to that healing place. Because if you know me, I like to explore all these things in detail because I personally believe that these drug issues are more than just about receptor changes or receptor sensitization or damage or whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting because I've been watching the CFS recovery guy that was referred to me by someone else, so thank you for that. And it's crazy how closely what people's experience of that is to withdrawal. And first of all, he made a whole video about how he's noticed, or how people susceptible to chronic fatigue syndrome are type A personality. And I've just noticed, before having any inclination or doing any deeper research into this, I noticed that as a pattern in my clients. Just like everything else, not everything applies to everyone, but generally the people that are really affected by withdrawal and these drugs tend to be empathic. They tend to be more sensitive in general. They tend to be type A, like to be in control, hustlers, those types of people. And he is saying the same thing in his videos. And another thing that he was just saying in a video that I just watched was, it's in your lowest points that you really kind of realize what is important in life and what you truly want out of life. Because a lot of times when you're just floating along and things are going well or just trudging along, you don't really pay, at least a lot of people don't really pay a lot of attention to what they really want, or maybe what they really want their life to look like, or what is possible, or they don't maybe set goals, intentions, dreams. Some people do, but a lot of people, I find, until they're in an immense amount of pain, maybe don't analyze their life in this way. And he was talking about, and the more I deep dive into neural retraining, the more I realize that visualization is a big part of this. The reason I want to share this is because 7 years prior to me ever taking a psych drug, my anxiety symptoms came to a peak. And I've shared this in other videos that I've struggled with symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety since I was, as long as I can remember, since I was in kindergarten. I had fears of public bathrooms. I had weird phobias. I had terrible separation anxiety, chronic stomach problems, missed a ton of school, and it just ballooned over the years. Panic attacks. I had all kinds of irrational fears. I had a terrible time being anywhere where my parents weren't present, my safe people weren't present, and it turned into this pretty bad anxiety disorder that peaked in 2004 when I was 22, which culminated in DPDR, my first time experiencing that, deep depression, very severe intrusive thoughts, still not as bad as what I experienced after I came off these drugs, but severe in the sense that they were so intense and they were accompanied by like severe panic attacks. They didn't loop the same way they did after I took the drug, but they would come in and I would have an intense anxious response and feel like I was gonna act impulsively on these intrusive thoughts. And it was at that time that I was in so much pain that my mom was sharing my struggles with her friend, and her friend was like, sounds like she has an anxiety disorder, and referred me to a book and CBT, and I did self-directed therapy and essentially cured myself completely. And without realizing it, and because we didn't really have much access, or we didn't really use the internet a whole lot in 2004, and certainly didn't have smartphones, I basically just followed these books that I was reading about recovering from anxiety disorder, and also added in my own spin, or my own kind of twist to it, which I don't even know how I came to this conclusion or was thinking about this, but I was like, how would I embody someone who didn't have anxiety? How does someone without anxiety talk? How do they stand? How do they talk to people? How do they look? How do they present themselves? How do they dress? How do they act? What do they do? And I would envision this, and then I would just try to embody it. So it felt like a fake it till you make it. So I wasn't just doing that. I was also working on like understanding anxiety disorder and how people tend to think who have anxiety disorders, how to work cognitively to reframe, do exposures. I was doing all of that plus this embodiment. And within a couple of months, I considered myself fully cured. I had no limitations, no more panic attacks, no more intrusive thoughts, nothing. And it was really incredible. And I also, in addition to those things I just mentioned, another thing that I would do is I was very mindful and cognizant of everything that I exposed myself to. I listened to upbeat music. I only would watch things on TV. Like, I really liked chick flicks, lighthearted comedies. I just really paid attention and focused on what makes me happy, what do I like, and I would just fill my days with those types of things, no matter how small they were. And I didn't realize it but what I was essentially doing was neural retraining. I was embodying someone who didn't have an anxiety disorder. I was changing the narrative, changing my consciousness, changing the way I perceived things and the world, while also at a conscious level and at a surface level, I guess, diving into the whole process of anxiety disorders and how to overcome them. And it's just so interesting. And the more, again, that I deep dive into this now, into the neural retraining, the more I'm like, that's exactly what I did to overcome my pretty severe anxiety disorder when I was 22. Now, you might think, well, then why weren't you able to snap out of withdrawal really quickly when it happened? And I've referred to this in other videos. My own belief is when you're in an acute phase, there's not a whole lot that you can do, because I tried reapplying all these same concepts when I went into acute withdrawal and it wasn't changing things. And that's why I was really struggling to understand what was going on. At that point in my first withdrawal, I didn't have neurological symptoms. I just had a lot of emotional and mental and a few physical symptoms. And it felt a lot like my anxiety disorder, but more intense. So I just was like, okay, well, I'll just apply the same approach that I did years ago when I overcame my anxiety disorder now, and it wasn't working. And I think too, like, there's levels, and this is why I share in videos the different phases that I believe withdrawal goes through. And also, like, when you're talking about neuroplasticity, when it comes to this type of chronic problem, it's not as simple as just CBT. And I'm not saying that, but I was doing more than just cognitive reframing. You know, I was literally like embodying someone who was well. And if you look into, I feel like visualization, the law of assumption, the law of attraction, neural retraining, they all are kind of explaining the same thing, but in different ways, which is, how do you change consciousness? How do you change what's firing in your brain to a place of wellness, essentially? And there's different paths to that, and that's why I share all of the different types of formal training to get you there. I also think there is deeper things going on potentially when acute withdrawal turns chronic, and this is why I share mind-body stuff, because that goes like one step deeper. So the neuroplasticity stuff, when you're looking at it formally, like DNRS, Gupta Primal Trust, from my understanding and what I've seen in DNRS, it can help you break the trauma loops. But how do you get deeper to why you were susceptible to this in the first place? And just like any chronic condition, most things, and I feel like I have an advantage here because I've had chronic diseases since I was young, is there's always pillars, or it's always multifaceted. And oftentimes healing from anything chronic involves a whole lifestyle overhaul. And this is why, when I've mentioned in other videos that pillared approaches or programs that offer a more pillared approach, I think are the best, because there is so many different factors that go into developing things that are chronic or things that go from acute to chronic. And okay, where am I going with this? It's just, it's interesting because I've seen the power of neuroplasticity and neural retraining in other aspects of my life, like when I overcame this pretty severe anxiety disorder in my 20s that had been building up throughout my whole life. And like I said, it was a combination of understanding what was going on, learning how, like, effective cognitive behavioral therapies, but also like embodying and changing the neural pathways that were going to pull me out of this years-long anxiety disorder. And it worked. Like, it really, really worked. And that's another reason why I've been talking so much about this type of thing lately, as far as DNRS, because again, without realizing I was doing it, I was essentially retraining my brain and changing the plasticity of my brain from someone chronically anxious to someone relaxed and confident. And it was incredible how well it worked. So I was dealing with like the surface level, the neural firing part, and the embodiment part. And visualization too, I wanted to share. I do believe that in my own recovery through withdrawal, which is much more than mind over matter, much more than just, CBT or cognitive reframing, I did a lot of visualization. And most of these programs involve some aspect of visualization. And this can be hard because when you're suffering so much, you're like, how can I even think about something positive? But it's more than just thinking about it. It's really getting into the feeling, and you're trying to make it as real as possible. So I've done this many times throughout my life, before I went into withdrawal, but after I recovered from the anxiety disorder. When I wanted to change my future, change things about my life, I used the power of visualization to get there. And it really does work. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of commitment, but it can be very powerful. I know there's a lot of Olympic athletes that see themselves and use visualization almost as much as physical training to get to their goal of a gold medal. They have to visualize it and embody that feeling, those thoughts, that experience before it actually happens. And there's been lots of studies of, they'll divide people into groups where they're teaching them a sequence on a piano. So they'll teach one group the actual sequence, and then the other group they'll just do it in their mind. They'll teach them, like, they'll go through the process of playing a piano in their mind, and it lights up the same areas of the brain. And so I think visualization can be a very powerful tool, but in my experience, to really make it come into fruition, it has to be a whole body experience. So Joe Dispenza gets into this in some of his teachings, and the way that I've always done it to achieve anything, and especially like healing from different chronic things that I've pulled myself out of through the years, is you have to really get into, it's almost like acting, where you're getting into a character. So I did this with the embodiment thing I described with the anxiety disorder in the past, but also you can do this totally in your mind, where you don't even have to like try to act as if and dress as if. I think the more you can involve your senses, the more you can involve, and this is true for all limbic retraining. I believe Coach Powers, the Benzo coach, when he does his school, from what I understand, his limbic retraining processes is very, you have to involve all of the senses. So this is how I have done visualization. So you get yourself, go to a quiet room, a quiet space, close your eyes, no matter how bad you're feeling. I did this in acute withdrawal. And it's almost impossible to fully relax. But if you can start with visualizing a time in your life in the past when you were incredibly happy, and really envision it, like in as much detail as you can. Remember what it was like to smell it, taste it, see it, hear it, all, and try to involve all your senses and get yourself into that like feeling. And then you can shift it, and DNRS does this is part of their program, and then shift it to the future. So once you kind of embody that feeling of what that was like based on a previous experience when you were doing well, how do you then carry that into the future? Then you take that positive feeling you've conjured up based on a past experience that you've envisioned, and then you think about, what would your life look like when you're healed? What would you want to do? What would your day look like? And really play that out in your mind in as much detail as possible while you're feeling those kind of positive feelings. That's the key to like neural retraining. And the reason I like the DNRS is because it phases it into two phases. So the first part of it is going through the dynamic movements of breaking the trauma loops. Then you go into the visualization part of it, and you recall something from the past, you bring up that feeling, and then you start visualizing your future. And I did a lot of this, not in the DNRS way back when I was in acute, but based on what I had done previously in my life. And so I would just get into bed or somewhere comfortable or sit on my bed. Sometimes I'd put my hand on my heart. Sometimes I wouldn't, and just start. And a lot of times this would involve like quite emotion. So for me, what helped me to conjure up that emotion was music. So whatever music kind of moves you or puts you into a very joyous place, it might come with positive associations of a really great time in your life in the past. That's what you want to look for. So what is some, because songs are very powerful and often will produce nostalgic feelings and take you right back to a place where you were, really happy in the past or in love or whatever it was. So I would find music and create a playlist of songs that I knew would conjure up those positive feelings. I would play them, and I was feeling horrible at this point, and I would again try to get into that, embody that. What did that feel like in the past? Like, and really envision it. It's best if you pick like one type of memory or one very specific memory, and there is science to this. I could make this video super long, but get into that feeling, get into that moment, envision it like it's happening, and then switch it to the future. And when you're healed, what will your life look like, your day-to-day life? Like, that is a really good way to do it. And I know that people really struggle to relax, and it's not always about relaxing, it's about trying to conjure up. And like I said, like, I would think back to those positive times, or even when I was thinking into the future with this music playing that conjured up these positive feelings, and I would just be bawling my head off. And that's actually a good thing. It was like tears of joy. And just when you can get yourself into that place mentally and envisioning your future, it's like really powerful. And so all of these different ways are methods of neural retraining. Like I said before, when I was in my really bad anxiety in my early 20s, like I would physically try to embody it. Like, how would that person act, think, feel? What would they do? How would they dress? All of that. And just, even though I was the most anxious I had ever been, combining the understanding of anxiety disorders with this embodiment and the visualizing and filling my environment with things that made me happy and lifted my spirits and were positive, it was very powerful. And I shared in my last video in the description a video by Nicole Arbor called From Disabled and Suicidal to Super Viral. And she talks a lot about, because she was so physically disabled, and how she started to heal herself because she basically had to work with her mind and her environment to start. And she really made sure that everything that she exposed herself to was positive. She only listened to things and watched things that made her feel good. She stopped watching the news. She stopped watching horror movies. You become much more mindful of your conversations and what you're listening to and what you're exposing yourself to. All of that matters. It really does matter. And I always challenge people too, who will say to me, oh, none of that's going to make a difference. Look at how much a horror story makes a difference. So you're feeling really, really bad, and you expose yourself to a horror story, a comment on YouTube saying someone is super protracted, really severe. Look at how much that spirals you. And I see that all the time when I'm coaching people. So if it can have that much of an impact, one comment to the negative, then accumulation of positive should be able to shift things in the opposite direction. Your negative bucket is already really full. I get that. And so it's going to take time and effort, but you want to start to swing things in the other direction. And I use that example to keep people mindful of, like, what you expose yourself to really does matter. So I don't know, hopefully this made sense. I feel like it was a little bit rambly. I'm just thinking of these things kind of on the fly sometimes and just speak about it. I'm a talker, if you haven't noticed. Let me know your thoughts on this and how you guys are doing, and I'll chat with you soon. Bye.